Welcome, dear students, to the massive open online course on Political Economy 2. In today's module, we are going to talk about the economic theory of capitalistic development. In this module, our main objective is to explore the various theories and stages of capitalistic development, and in the process of our explanation, we will try to form a quantitative expression of the process of growth. Now, the process of capital accumulation under different conditions of technical change, population growth, and capital formation has been the subject of intense investigation in recent times. The structure of the fundamental unit of production, the character of the market and competition, the forms of technical change, and the mechanisms of investment and capital movement all change with the growth of the economy. Thus, the theory of economic growth needs to go beyond the specification of the movement of economic magnitudes in order to establish the organic connections between economic growth and the development of the economic structure as a whole. While we attempt to make a periodization of the growth process, we find that the historically distinct periods within the development of the capitalist economy are defined theoretically by the form which the growth process takes, or in other words, by the tendencies which dominate the growth process. So, the stages of economic growth are defined by these impediments or barriers, as you can say, and therefore by these structural relations. It is furthermore the pressure of the growth process itself which breaks apart these barriers, thereby establishing the expansion of the economy on a new basis. Before we move to the periodization of the growth process, we will form a quantitative expression of the growth process. We take certain assumptions. They are as follows. The economy is presumed to be isolated from the possibility of international economic relations. Abstraction is made from the domestic economic activities of the government. Capital is assumed to be privately owned. Decisions as to the growth of the capital are assumed to be made within the individual units of capital. Workers are assumed to consume all their wages. Capitalists invest a given proportion of their profits towards the expansion of the capital. And the expansion of capital is taken to be self-sustaining in the sense that the goal of expansion is expansion itself, that is, capital is invested primarily for the sake of expansion and not for the purpose of consumption in the future. So formally we have an expression here. Our expression here is capital A is equal to A, small a, into R by K. Now here capital A is the rate of expansion of the total capital stock, while small a is the proportion of the profits that are accumulated. Capital R is the total value of the profits, and capital K is the value of the total capital stock. So if we assume Y to be equal to the value of the output net of depreciation, small w as the money wage rate, and capital L as total employment, then the value of the expression capital A equal to A into capital R by capital K can be written as capital A, that is the rate of expansion of the total capital stock, is basically the proportion of the profits accumulated into the total output minus W into L, that is expenditure that is incurred by the total employment that is given to the laborers, Y minus WL divided by capital K. If we divide the whole expression by L, we get something like that is here written on the screen, that is A into Y by L minus WL by L whole divided by K by L. Now we already have written that Y by L which is per capita output per unit of labor, that is small y, minus W divided by small k. Small k here means K by L, that is capital per unit of labor. So doing all the manipulations here in the calculation, we find that E, which we have taken it to be small y divided by small w, and ultimately we have the expression that the rate of expansion of the total capital stock is basically equal to AW into E minus 1 by small k, that is capital per unit of labor. Thus, the process of growth is expressed quantitatively through the money wage, the capital to labor ratio, that is small k, and the gross margin, that is small e, where firms are assumed to invest a given proportion of their profits. Thus, we have the different stages of capitalistic development divided into basically 3 stages. These stages are defined by the process which dominates it, and specifically by the barriers to accumulation which is peculiarly inherent to each of these stages. The first stage is that of stage of primitive capital accumulation. The second stage is stage of absolute concentration, and the third stage is a stage of monopoly capital. Let us now look at the stage of primitive capital accumulation. This is the period of capital accumulation without technical change. It is defined by Marx as that period of accumulation during which capital subordinates labor on the basis of the technical conditions in which historically it finds it. So accumulation takes place with a relatively stagnant technology because the individual firm must attain a certain minimum size in terms of the value of invested capital before it can establish itself on a sound technical footing. Primitive accumulation is therefore synonymous with the concentration of capital into increasingly larger units. The key barrier to this increase in size is a market which is limited by the coexistence of pre-capitalist production. This limitation is also expressed through a constraint on the supply of labor. We now next move over to stage 2, that is a stage of absolute concentration. This second period is defined as synonymous with the increasing concentration of larger and larger amounts of capital in the hands of fewer and fewer units of capital in each major industry. The progress of technology during this period tends to increase the capital-labor ratio and with it the minimum feasible size of the firms. Restraints on the growth of capital in this period are associated with the necessity for price competition, over-shrinking markets in the downswing of business cycle, and the resulting contraction of profit margins. Each stage in the development of capitalist production must be understood as a transitional stage. So primitive accumulation is defined as a process of transition to a creation of capitalist production and of accumulation on a thoroughgoing capitalist basis. This is accomplished through the increasing concentration of capital into larger units, which form the basis of important technical innovations that identify the process of industrialization and what Marx calls modern industry. The increasing concentration is itself a product of accumulation in that period and can be said to create the conditions for growth on a new basis. Similarly, the subsequent period of absolute concentration is a period of transition to what will be termed as the third stage, that is monopoly capital. There is therefore no stage of competitive capitalism which disappears as if by magic in order to give way to the epoch of large-scale production. Critical to the specification of this process is the pace and form of technical change. The pace of technical change will be taken in a general sense to be a function of the rate of accumulation. This is not only because of the connection between accumulation and the formation of fixed capital, but also because of the relationship between the pace of accumulation and the dynamism that is prevalent in the economy. The more rapid is accumulation, the more dynamic the economy will be considered as a whole. The effect of technical change will be to increase the ratio of capital to labor as long as the period is considered as a whole, And we find this type of assumption also in Calder's theories of economic growth, as well as in the theories of classical economists like that of Marx. In particular, if technical change during the period of the Industrial Revolution is associated with the mechanization of production, with mechanical improvement in the application of unassisted labor, then the rise in the capital to labor is simply another expression for this process. So, the importance of the rise in the capital-labor ratio basically is derived from the tendency for the size of the firms to increase over time. Since new and advanced technology is associated with large investments of fixed capital, it will also be associated with increases in the minimum size of the firm. This may be defined as one element of large-scale economies whose introduction is crucial to the theory of economic gains. So, here we can say that economies of large-scale production are important mainly for the treatment of the competitive process. The fundamental theorem of analysis of technical change is that absolute concentration and competition, these are two basic aspects of the same process. Where there is price competition, there will also be absolute concentration operating as the underlying rationale of the competitive process. In this stage of absolute concentration, competition works itself out in the following manner. Assuming that the process of technical change within an industry is well underway, and the industry will then consist of a hierarchy of firms which are determined by differentials of cost. These differentials are basically functions or dependent on size differentials, which in turn may be associated with the differentials in the modernization of equipments. The smallest and the marginal firms are so because they have not installed the most modern technique, which would result in lowering their unit cost, but involve also greater capital investment. Price competition will take place insofar as the lowest cost firms choose to translate cost differentials into lower prices. In order to drive out the high cost firms, it is necessary for the larger firms to drive the price down to or even lower than the level of cost of those firms. So this process of price reduction can be seen from the other side as a process by which productivity increases are translated into falling prices. The difference in cost between the large and the smaller firms reflect the increase in productivity represented by the larger firms vis-a-vis the less advanced marginal firms. Over the course of the development process, advances in technique will be associated with increase in size. The hierarchy of firms defined by the differentials of cost is an alternative explanation or expression for technical change. Thus, price competition implies both an increase in the minimum size of the firms and also a concentration of capital in the hands of a few large firms, along with a tendency for prices to fall more or less in step with changes in productivity. Now, in this stage of absolute concentration, there is a desire of the larger firms to increase their share of the market. That is, the larger firms will engage in price competition insofar as they need to grow at the expense of the smaller firms, the smaller higher cost firms. They will cut into the market of these firms mainly through the process of price competition. The second condition is that the marginal firms will exist whose costs are high enough relative to the larger firms that it is possible for them to be eliminated from the market by price competition. As long as technical change is going on without a decline in the level of prices, or at least without a commensurate decline in the level of prices, and as long as money wage is not increasing in step with productivity, the gross margin, that is E in our expression, the small e in our expression, will rise. As long as this rise is not wholly counteracted by an increase in the capital-labor ratio, the rate of accumulation will go on increasing. So, as long as the marginal firms, the process of competition, technical change, and absolute concentration will go on taking place, the ultimate result of these processes must be the elimination of the conditions on which they are based, that is, a marginal high-cost farms. The long-run implication of the rise in the capital-labor ratio, barring a rise in the gross margin or a fall in the wage rate, money wage rate, would be a fall in the rate of profit. During these periods, when markets are expanding rapidly and the gross margin is high and increasing as a result of the disparity between the price movement and the movements of productivity, the rise in the capital-labor ratio will be offset in its effect on the rate of profit. Similarly, when price competition sets in, however, the gross margin tends to contract with a fall in price. The downward trend of prices results from absolute concentration, which is itself a product of the capital-intensive nature of the new technique. With prices falling with productivity and the capital-labor ratio rising, there will be, barring a fall in the money wage rate, a decline in the rate of profit. So, from the point of view of the concentration of capital, it is precisely the vertical integration of the firm on an international scale that is critical rather than the export of capital or the general possibility of production in areas of low money wages. Vertical integration is the direction of raw material sources which assures access to necessary inputs at minimum cost and thereby accentuates the cost differentials and cost advantages of larger firms. The international expansion of capital accelerates the concentration of capital and the transition to the stage of monopoly capital. The possibility of vertical integration is tied to the access to capital for investment on the part of the firm and may be considered as an additional economy of large-scale production which favors the concentration of capital into the hands of a small number of large firms. We now focus on stage 3, the stage of monopoly capital. In this period, absolute concentration is no longer the dominant force, and therefore price competition no longer acts as the mechanism for determining the relationship of money wages to prices, that is, the gross margin. The gross margin has a tendency to increase with the result that capital tends to expand more rapidly than its market. Such a tendency exists throughout the development of capitalism, but only in this period of monopoly capital does it express directly the dominant barrier intrinsic to the accumulation process. Once absolute concentration within a given industry has reached a point where the highest cost firms are able to maintain sufficiently large profit margins that to drive them out of competition would rather require price reductions of a magnitude that may be considered dangerous even from the point of view of the lowest cost firms, then the process of the growth of the industry and the firms within the industry undergoes a radical alteration. Once this process has taken place within a large proportion of the dominant industries of the economy, the growth process of the economy as a whole also undergoes significant modification. This marks the transition from the period of absolute concentration to the period of monopoly capital. In other words, this marks the successful completion of the process of absolute concentration. The distinguishing feature of this last period, that is a period of monopoly capital, is that concentration basically is not essential to the process of the growth of the economy. While in this period, the capital-labor ratio may still tend to rise in particular cases, this tendency will no longer be central to the process of growth. competitive advantages of large farms extend far beyond those associated with fixed capital requirements. Marketing and sales on a national scale, research and production development, and integration of the firm both with respect to productive inputs and retail outlets, which we call vertical integration, and with regard to the production of related products, which we call horizontal integration, all constitute advantages of large-scale production not directly connected to technical economies or to increase in the capital-labor ratio. The growth of forms of competition other than price competition now becomes necessary as a result of the changing structure of the market. On the other hand, this very shift in the forms of competition, like advertising, product development, etc., will tend to exclude the entry of new competitors into the economy. Since it is no longer possible to drive out competition via price competition, cost differentials due to technical changes are no longer directly translated into falling prices. The rise in the capital-labor ratio no longer implies a decline in the rate of profit, since a decline in cost resulting from technical change by not leading to a fall in prices will, if there is no rise in the money wage, result in an increase in the gross margin. The critical role of market expansion expresses itself in different ways depending on the degree to which firms continue to expand their capacity. Number one, there can be a tendency for accelerated growth due to a rise in the gross margins. Number two, in periods during which the rise in the gross margin is translated into investment, the market as a whole will continue to expand as a direct result of those investment activities. In this case, expansion of the market is simply the other side of the accumulation process, which we witnessed in the first stage, and the market grows in step with the increase in the capacity of the firm. Number three, when new investments involves further reduction of cost, this will lead to a further increase in gross margin and in the rate of accumulation. This aspect of the accumulation process is equivalent to that which characterizes the upswing of the cycle in the stage of absolute concentration. This process runs up against inherent barriers which limit the degree to which expansion of investment and demand as a whole remain in step with expansion of capacity. Accelerating investment means accelerating the growth of capacity, and any lag in the expansion of demand will reduce the utilization of capacity and act as a brake on investment. The result is that the familiar downward spiral of investment, production, capacity utilization, and profit. The fall in the rates of utilization will depress the rate of profit by inflating the capital-labor ratio. So during the period of absolute concentration, it was possible for the firms to increase their rates of utilization in the face of a falling overall level of demand by driving out of competition a part of excess capacity. While in this period of monopoly capital, the last stage, this no longer remains an immediate possibility. So we come to an end of this module where we have discussed extensively the various stages of capitalistic development. At the end, we would like to summarize the main takeaways from this module. The first stage of capitalist development, that is a stage of primitive accumulation, is a period of accumulation where there is no technical change. In the second stage, that is a stage of absolute concentration, the progress of technology during this period tends to increase the capital-labor ratio, and with it also the minimum size of the farms. Since new and advanced technique is associated with large investments of fixed capital, it will also be associated with increases in the minimum size of the farm. So the feasible size, the minimum feasible size of the firm becomes a very important factor in this stage of capitalistic development. The last stage, that is a stage of monopoly capital, the distinguishing feature of this stage is that concentration is not essential to the process of the growth of the economy. During the period of absolute concentration, it was possible for firms to increase their rates of utilization in the face of overall level of demand, falling overall level of demand, by driving out competition as a part of excess capacity. But in the case of monopoly capital, that is in the case of the third stage, this is not a possibility.